Hi all, Marina Kukla here again to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy for work success, CBTw session 5. I'll present an overview and then some of the key takeaways for this session. So again, as usual, we start with our work check-in where every single veteran present goes through and says what's going on with them and work. A lot of times this is in regards to their work goal, but it also could be something else. Um, but every person says something, even if it's no update or nothing new this week. And then you'll go through the homework from session 4, which was to begin using the 4 A's. Everyone should have an opportunity to talk about theirs, but usually only a couple of people do. As a reminder, when people haven't done homework or they don't talk much about the content of it, but they indicate that they have done it or they tried it, sometimes I'll kind of pivot and ask process-based questions to kind of get the conversation going. How was it? Was it easier? Was it hard? Is it something you have ever done before? Things like that. And so then the third introductory element is reviewing session 5's agenda, which is these 3 bullet points here on page 39. And so this week we're going to talk about barriers to work. All right, and so then we start with some small education about what are some of the many different types of barriers that it can impact work success or our goals as we're trying to pursue them. So this is all across the board, many concrete factors like lack of transportation, lack of resources and other things, to what we're here to target in CBTW, which are cognitive and behavioral factors. There could also be other things that get in the way that kind of cross over, like things like problematic substance use, or legal problems, mental and physical health problems. So we have a wide array here. These are all barriers and issues that veterans who've previously gone through CBTW identified, and so that's why we included them here. But of course, this is definitely not an exhaustive list, and there are many other barriers that people often experience. And so then on page 41, we have our first sort of mini um, exercise, and veterans will sit down with a few minutes of quiet time to go through these and write in their manuals. Now, if they don't have their manuals, what might be helpful if it's appropriate for your group and doing this virtually is that you can share your screen and then they can see these questions and they can just sit and think and reflect on them. And then after a few minutes of people writing and or reflecting on these questions, then you would come together as a group and offer people an opportunity to talk about theirs or share their experiences with these barriers. So really quickly, the first is just situations or circumstances that might act as barriers, things like transportation, difficulty getting along with people, difficulty with customers, poor computer skills, no resume, etc. So those are just examples. Of course, there could be many other situations or circumstances that people often identify. The second overlaps, of course, with our CBTW domains. What thoughts have you had that get in the way of finding a job or doing a good job at work? And then number 3, what feelings get in the way? And then number 4, what behaviors or behavioral patterns kind of get in the way? This could be things like showing up late to work, no showing an interview, walking off the job, getting in conflicts with people a lot. That's a very common one that people identify. And there could be lots of other patterns as well, not following through generally. Um, so after they've gone through these and written at least something down for each one, hopefully then you've come together and allowed people time to share theirs. Then we get to more of the meat of this session, which is to go through the 4 A's and particularly act and accept. And the idea here is that we go through this, we present a problem solving model, and then they can use that problem solving model to address the barriers that they've identified and written down or reflected on here on page 41. So that's how this session flows. And so, of course, last week we went through the full 4 A's, and we especially focused on the first couple of A's to be aware, assess, and answer. And now we're going to shift to the fourth and fifth, or the third and fourth A's, act and accept. So you would go through this education on 42, which tells us a little bit more about those 2 A's. And then we present this idea on the bottom of 42 that we can think about these controllable barriers as problems to be solved. Hence, we can apply that problem solving model to try to address those and do something about them. All right. And so what I would suggest here is that if you can have veterans read out loud, that's really helpful, especially to continue to engage folks and engage people who might have difficulty with group or are not coming, or when they do come, they don't share a lot. So again, this is another way to engage them. Now we have on 43, our problem solving model. It would be helpful to go through this as facilitators to review all of these steps. And again, remember that just like with our 4As last week, this is the first time they've seen this particular model. And so we don't expect them to master it. So going through it slowly and in accordance with the needs and sort of presentation, the case conceptualizations of the people in your group makes a lot of sense here. So after we've gone through each of the steps, now we will go through an example together as a group. I provided a fillable PDF that has a full example on it. You can use that. You can come up with your own, especially as it is pertinent and relates to the veterans in your group and something that they can really learn from and connect with. So however you want to do this, I do think it makes a lot of sense to use the fillable PDF. Another really helpful tool doing this virtually is when you go together through this together as a group, you can use a problem or a barrier that someone in group has identified. It's really helpful that you very clearly and concretely identify the problem. The rest of the problem solving steps flow from this. And if it's kind of muddled up or not clear, or it's really multiple problems in one, then that's where things can kind of go sideways and not make sense as you go forward. I like to start with a concrete problem. The reason is that the goal of us doing it together as a group is to show veterans, demonstrate to them how they would do this in their own lives. So using something concrete and basic, you can really explicitly show them how to do this. And we know we can get through the rest of the steps in a coherent way that makes sense. So sometimes I'll start with something, could be any number of problems. Maybe it's like a transportation barrier, or I don't know how to update my resume, or um, I had an interview, but I haven't heard back. Now what do I do? Like that's more of a scenario, but it could be phrased as a problem too. Um, or I get super anxious before I go to interviews and then I mess up, and that could be a problem. And then we would use some of the techniques that we've discussed here. So you want to very clearly identify the problem. Then you want to, as a group, brainstorm solutions. And this is where I usually have people sort of throw out different solutions. And with brainstorming, any solution's a good one, even if it's a bad one. Some people will just simply identify like, I need more income, I can't pay the rent, or I have other bills I can't pay. And so if that's the problem, that's also interfering with them being able to get resources to get a job, then we also can brainstorm that. And sometimes we brainstorm bad solutions like, well, you could steal money, or you could, these are clearly not things that we would suggest people do, but at the brainstorm stage, we still write them down. Then we assess the best solutions. I usually ask if it's a person in group who has the problem and we're doing their problem live, I ask them to kind of assess, like, what do they think are the most feasible solutions for them? As long as they're appropriate, reasonable solutions, we go with that. And so usually I have them pick like 2 or 3 that they like. And then for the top one, the number one solution they picked, then we lay out a plan and just do it. And it's really important here that we are really concrete and we really flesh this out. And so we want to get really granular with our plan. And sometimes it's, okay, well, I need to get a bus pass, and veterans here where I live, they can get a bus pass if they're service connected. So, okay, I need transportation to get to these job interviews. Okay, the solution is get this veteran bus pass. Then you have to lay out a plan. Well, how do you know where to go? Okay, I'm going to look it up on the internet. How do you know their hours? Well, I'm going to call them first before I go. Okay. How do you know what types of ID you need? I'm going to ask them. So each of those steps would be on the plan. Very granular. We don't usually think about this that way. And it's like, okay, how are you going to get down there? What day and time are you going to go? That would go on the plan. Okay, I'm going to try to get a ride to go down there. Who are you going to ask for a ride? Who's going to give you a ride? Well, my sister will give me a ride. Okay, when are you going to call her, text her? How will you ask her? I'm going to text her, or I'm supposed to see her later and I'll ask her then. Okay, cool. And then you go through the plan step by step Then we have evaluate the results. This would be if we'd already done it, and then we go back and say, how did that work? Did you get the bus pass? Does the bus pass work? Did you try it out? Are you okay riding the bus and you know how to do that? So that would be, and if it didn't work, like the person went down there and they're not offering that deal to service connected veterans anymore, then you'd have to go to another solution from this list. And maybe there's another solution where you could get a job within walking distance of your home. And that would be a solution where you didn't necessarily need a bus pass, but you could still get a job. And maybe the secondary solution, laying out a plan to do that, would be working with your voc rehab specialist, et cetera, putting in some applications, seeing what's around your house that you would be interested in, things like this. So this is what we would do. Then hopefully you have just a few minutes left that you can allow veterans to write their own example during group. They would sit there and write in the manual, and then they would at least write some notes down, if not go through a full example for themselves. Again, this is really important, the opportunity to go through these full didactic exercises themselves. It allows them to better learn, integrate, and then subsequently use the information that we're trying to teach. If you don't have time, what people have been doing is assigning it for homework, but then you need to make sure you have time on the back end. And session 6 is very full of material. And so there won't be a ton of time to go back and go through people's examples. So hopefully people go through an example on their own, and then you can have at least one person share theirs. We're usually up against the clock at this point. But allowing some time for sharing, at least one further example that somebody can say, I can write this out. Most people like problem solving and they can do it. Even if they're concrete and they're not able to reflect on their thoughts, they can do this. This is very behavioral, concrete, and people have oftentimes done problem solving in the past. And so they can already relate that previously learned knowledge to this. And then of course we have our take home, which is actually to work the problem solving steps to a barrier related to work that they're currently experiencing. And then we give some examples here just to get them thinking, but it could be anything. And I would say too, you can work through this as a group the next week, but there's just not as much time to do that. And if they haven't had a chance here, then you really want to emphasize the homework, because the homework is essentially then to fill this out on pages 44 and 45. So that's session 5. A look ahead, session 6 is coping with stress and anxiety. This is such a rich session full of many tools, but it's also a long one. So with session 5, we really want to try to get through the content if we reasonably can. If we can't, or there are barriers, that's okay, and it happens. In terms of our primary CBTw techniques that we'll be using, again, we want to continue with the basic thought reflections to help them begin to be more aware of their own thinking, to start to assess it, and if appropriate for that person, to start to answer it from our 4As. Again, you don't have to feel like you have to respond to everything, but maybe just helping them identify when what they're experiencing is a thought, especially as it relates to problems that they might be having, and they might tell a story or a narrative about this situation they've encountered. A lot of times within that, there will be thoughts that you can just pull one out that seems important or that stood out to you, and just very basically reflect, again, using that first person if you can, using those thinking words and being really clear about it. The other technique we can start using is behavioral reflection. This is our first sort of behaviorally sort of mixed, but it includes more behavioral content as we get to the act and accept A's. So you can start just basic reflections, like you've noticed that it's hard to work with people, that you get in a lot of arguments, or you've noticed that for you, like you walk off the job or you get super anxious before the interview and then you have a drink and you don't show up. Like those are some basic and some more advanced behavioral reflections, but this is where you can start to use those. And you can also use those behavior words so that your reflection is really active or just very consistent with what they've said. This is where we can start to learn more about veterans too, and what it's really like for them and what's really getting in the way. And that we can integrate into our building case conceptualizations of like, where is this person really tripped up when it comes to work success? and what things are going well and what things are going not so well that's really getting in their way. That helps us learn a lot about them, and then we can use that knowledge as we go forward in working through the rest of the material and the rest of the sessions with them. All right, well, I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.